You want massive arms, right? So did I. Since I first started training, you can say arms were always a huge priority for me. Now later, at my biggest and heaviest, my arms eventually stretched the measuring tape at just over 19 inches fully pumped, and at a body weight of only about 205 pounds. But it wasn't always like that. When I first started training, I was a fairly lanky 130 pounds. And if I remember correctly, my arms were only about 12 inches fully flexed. But I'm not gonna sit here and say my arms were a struggle for me to develop, because truthfully, training them and figuring out what worked for them over time, it came pretty naturally to me. But what I wanna share with you are the main things that I focused on very early on. Things that I also still do today. All the things that I attribute the most amount of progress to my arms that I've made over the years. And from my experience, most of the things that I'm gonna share with you here are very overlooked today. So if you're looking to bring up your arms, here are the main things that I focused on that I believe you should as well. First, body weight is always a limiting factor for arm size. You can't expect to be 150 pounds and have huge arms. I know, proportionately, I have very large arms for my body weight. There are guys walking around 20, 30, or even 50 pounds heavier than me who still have smaller arms. But one thing that's universal, as I added more weight to my frame, my arms grew as well. At 130 pounds, I had tiny arms. When I got up to 150 pounds, my arms were bigger. By 175 pounds, my arms started to reach that 16-inch mark. Later, by 185 to 190 pounds, my arms were actually as big as 18 inches. But it wasn't until I crossed over that 200-pound body weight mark that my arms actually broke 19 inches. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say that you're gonna experience that same body weight to arm ratio, but I have seen this over and over again. If you're not getting your body weight up, you're not gonna grow bigger arms. If you're 5'10" or taller, there's no such thing as someone with massive arms with a body weight under 190 to 200 pounds. Not unless you're in contest shape. And if you are, you probably sit closer to 220 to 230 pounds in the off season. You don't need to set a goal body weight, but the bottom line, if you want bigger arms, you need to become a bigger individual. Next point I want to make sure to dedicate time to training the arms directly. This one should be very obvious, but I've come to learn that today, it really isn't. Over 20 years of training, I've experimented with every training split and every training plan under the sun. I've dedicated time to growing mass to my entire body. I've dedicated specialization blocks to bringing up weak points. And there are times where I dedicated training to just building bigger arms. There's also been times where I've trained them just at maintenance. But there's one thing that was consistent every single time. And that is that my arms grew when I had a dedicated arm day in my training plan. Yes, that means that every time my arms have grown was when I had an arm day. I've done things like push-pull legs many times before. And while it does work well to bring up my chest and my back, that's pretty much the only reason I'll actually run it. Today, I personally have no reason to focus on arm development, as it makes much more sense for me to basically grow anywhere else. So I currently do incorporate that style of training, but I do so for the exact reason that I'm just training my arms at maintenance. In the past, when I've run push-pull legs or anything similar, my arms just wouldn't grow. And as soon as I returned to having at least 1 or even 2 arm days per week, that's when the measuring tape would start to stretch again. And last point I want to make here, get strong on big compound lifts. Today, I see a new trend of ego lifting. When I first started training, ego lifters were guys who benched with their butt off the pad, guys who would bring the bar halfway down, and of course, the guys who quarter squatted. Today, there's a completely new trend that's holding a lot of guys back. That new trend is over-exaggerated form. It almost looks like they're not even training in the gym, but rather they're simply trying to look good while training. As a result, guys are lifting extremely sub-maximal weight to over-exaggerate form. Now listen, I'm all for solid form, but never forget that the whole purpose of training is to create more tension on the muscle and create more overload over time. If you're still lifting the same weights consistently because you're afraid to put some intensity behind that lift, you are severely limiting yourself long term. Personally, as I progressively pushed heavier weights in the gym, I got my heavy pressing strong, my heavy pulling, my heavy benches, my rows. That got my arms stronger as well. And as a result, that allowed me to lift more weight on my arm isolation exercises. Now, combining this with pushing my weights up in the gym and pushing my food up and my body weight as a result, that has always been the key to building bigger arms for me. And if you're someone who's struggling to build bigger arms, You're gonna stop doing all that fluff and pump work. You're gonna train those basic lifts progressively with good technique over time. You're gonna progressively push your body weight up with more food. And as a result, you're finally gonna grow massive arms as a result of this process. And if you want the exact programs that I personally recommend to build more muscle, all my old school programs are down below. And as always, if you want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.